On December 1st, 1883, in a luxurious and exquisite mansion, a 60-year-old man was experiencing the most difficult time of his life. He was Hu Shuiyan, a well-known businessman in Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces. Today, he was told that crowds of people were flocking to his bank to withdraw money, and he had to pledge the title deeds for his land and house to the bank, hoping to survive the unexpected disaster. When the news that the Fukang Bank had suffered a serious bank run spread to the Shanxi courtyards, the bankers of Shanxi were not shocked. At that moment, they had not expected the industry to snowball to a collapse. But when foreign bankers in nearby Shanghai heard the news, they clapped and cheered. As a large-scale local bank with abundant capital had suddenly collapsed. This implied that the efforts of Chinese businessmen to attempt to control foreign trade had ended in failure, and the foreign banks had won victory in the local gold rush. During the last decade of the 19th century, Western economic forces entered the market by stealth. So what role did the private bankers play in this commercial infighting? Before the middle of the 19th century, many banks were set in Suzhou and Hankou. When the Taiping Rebellion pushed forward to the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River, business in the region deteriorated. The bank owners of Suzhou and Hankou were anxious to relocate their businesses. At that time, a newly emerging city caught their attention. After the First Opium War, the Chinese government was forced to open Shanghai as a treaty port. Britain and France established their leased territory in the Bund, and then foreign banks entered, one after another. British businessmen transported domestic textiles by sea for sale in India, and then shipped huge amounts of opium from India to Shanghai, where they received silk and tea in return. During the 30 years between 1865 and 1895, the total volume of imports and exports in Shanghai almost quadrupled. Meanwhile, more and more foreign banks swarmed into Shanghai. A world-famous Far East financial center came into being. But what the mass foreign capital brought to this ancient empire was far beyond the superficial prosperity. This was where the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC's Shanghai branch, is located. The bronze gates and the bronze lines on both sides were cast in Britain and then delivered here. Besides HSBC, British banks including Oriental Bank Corporation and Standard Chartered Bank swarmed into Shanghai at the time. Almost simultaneously, most Chinese private banks in Suzhou and Hankou were relocated to Shanghai. Therefore, Shanghai became the place where banks multiplied the fastest in the country. In 1872, the Chu family of Shanxi opened 2 bank branches, Sanjin Yuan and Bai Chuan Tong, in Shanghai. There were 22 private banks in Shanghai, and Shanghai became a place of great strategic importance for bankers. At a time when the banks were mostly operated by Shanxi merchants, the Fukong Bank was the flagship of those from what was considered the South. Its owner was Hu Shuiyan.
胡雪岩这个人啊，那么这个人应该说是个雄才大略的商人，天资特别高啊。他受的教育比较小，但是悟性很高。
Hu's family was in straitened circumstances during his childhood, so he was sent to a local bank as an apprentice. The owner of the bank had no offspring, so he passed it to Hu before his death. Therefore, Hu got his own bank. That was in 1860. At that time in Shanghai, small local banks, sometimes called money shops, foreign banks, and Chinese private banks were in a tripartite confrontation.
外资银行是全球化的机构，它在全球范围内调动资本，它的势力最强，规模最大，运作程度最高。票号是国内运作能力更高，规模更大，跨这个运作范围更广的这么一个金融机构。钱庄主要是为地域经济服务，换句话讲，外资银行为全球服务，票号为全国服务，钱庄为局部区域服务。
At the time, the 3 financial powers coordinated and distributed responsibilities in such a way that if a foreign businessman wanted to import goods from the Chinese mainland, the payment was usually transferred by a foreign bank to a local money shop in Shanghai. But money shops did not normally have branches, so they had to authorize the private banks for remittance. This is a model in the Shanxi Businessmen Museum, demonstrating the prosperous business scene on both sides of the Tonghui River in Beijing. In the late 1800s, a large number of goods were available for import and export trade between various ports and the Chinese mainland. At the time, foreign banks had not penetrated very deeply into the Chinese mainland, so currency circulation between ports and the Chinese mainland was carried out through private banks. Though foreign banks monopolized tariffs and salt taxes, they had to admit that remittance between different provinces in China and drafts signed by Chinese entities had to go through Shanxi banks. Being shrewd, Hu realized that if he wanted to increase the benefit shares of the money shop, he must learn from the operation model of the private banks. 3 years later, Hu relocated the headquarters of his money shop from Hangzhou to Shanghai and set himself up in the remittance business. At that point, the Fukong money shop became an active member of the remittance industry. Such banks represented by Hu's became known as the Southern Group. Those operated by Shanxi businessmen were called the Western Group. As foreign banks and domestic private banks competed with each other, a campaign that was to have a profound influence on Chinese society was unfolding on a spectacular scale. This campaign brought an unexpected business opportunity to private bankers. After British and French troops opened the door to China, many ranking officials, including Zhang Guofan, Li Hongjiang, and Zuo Zongtang, became aware of the gap between China and the rest of the world through contact with the foreign powers. They called on the Chinese to learn about advanced technologies from the West in order to contain the West's political and economic invasion of China. From the 1860s, China sent out students to Western developed countries, purchased foreign firearms, and learned about their technologies. This is known as the self-strengthening movement. However, it was not convenient for the three Qing officials to deal with foreigners. At that time, Hu had a close working relationship with Zuo. Through his experience in foreign trade, Hu found a new outlet for his talents. The friendship between Hu and Zuo started in 1862. In that year, Zuo succeeded the governor of Zhejiang on Jiang's recommendation. Zuo defaulted on almost 5 months' pay and provisions due to his troops in Anhui. The number of soldiers starved to death equaled those who had died in battle. After entering Zhejiang, this problem still haunted Zuo and caused him great distress. Hu appeared before Zuo. In 3 days, he gathered together 2,800 tons of grain for the troops. Zuo appreciated his timely help. From that moment on, Hu was trusted by Zuo and acted as both an official and a businessman, going between trading ports, including Ningbo and Shanghai. He became the most powerful and influential government official dressed as a businessman.
商要发展，必须借助官的资源，而官呢，他也要借助商来实现自己的战略目标。但是官商结合是不容易的，不容易在哪里呢？官有官的立场，商有商的立场，双方很容易发生一个矛盾冲突。只有天资很高的人，更容易做到知己知彼的人，才能在这两者之间架设一座联系的桥梁。
During this period, Hu's bank assisted Zuo in establishing the Fuzhou Dockyard and the Gansu Weaving Administration. He also helped Zuo import Western machines to dredge the Jinghe River. Through this movement aimed at saving the nation through industrial development, banks opened by Shanxi merchants also invested and participated in the operation of modern industries. When Li Hongjiang founded a trade bureau in Shanghai in 1872, he had to borrow hundreds of taels of silver from private banks. Later, building railway lines and developing the Navy became important components of the self-strengthening movement. Most of the naval military expenditure and railway building funds allocated from different provinces were transferred by private banks.
票号对洋务运动应当说起了一定的支持作用。一个是表现在洋务运动的资金筹措，比如说需要募集股本，票号代办股票的买卖；再一个呢，票号也直接融资给从事进出口贸易和洋务活动的一些企业。第三呢，票号的汇兑对他们的资金调度起了直接的服务作用。总之呢，在金融上，洋务运动和票号的关系是很密切的，票号是对洋务运动起了积极的支持作用的。
The connections with industry largely increased the profits of banks, among which the Fukang Bank achieved a particularly outstanding performance. In 1872, the Fukang Bank had over 20 branches across the country. Today, the former residence of Hu Sheyan, located in Hangzhou, receives a constant stream of visitors. Coincidentally, the residence was built in 1872, when the Fukang Bank was in the heyday of its business. But also at that time, a fierce commercial war was brewing between domestic and foreign firms. In this part of the country, the market price of silver dollar had fluctuated with the buying and selling prices of silk and tea in Shanghai. Private banks would arrange their capital and set prices according to the market information of silk and tea in Shanghai. Foreign businessmen realized that the price of silk and tea had a very large impact on China's finance and economy.
中国的当时是茶是出口的最大宗的商品，那么但是这个价格呢，中国是用银来计算，而那个国际市场呢是用金本位来计算，这个金银比价呢，又操纵在这个就是外商手里，而外商呢，他往往又在中国呢就以这个汇丰银行的牌价为基准，那么汇丰银行它这个牌价呢，它就是往往怎么有利于外商，它就怎么调剂。
By the late 1870s, the price of natural silk was totally under the control of foreign businessmen. They sometimes nitpick and depress the price, and sometimes stop purchasing altogether. Chinese silk farmers led difficult lives under brutal exploitation. This caught Hu's attention. He decided to compete with the foreign businessmen. Between the summer and autumn of 1883, in order to raise the export price of natural silk, Hu used the money capital in his bank to issue down payments in the villages and small towns of Jiangsu and Zhejiang. Then he sent people to purchase natural silk. In total, they bought 14,000 bags of silk, spending 20 million taels of silver.
由于它垄断了国内相当程度的丝，就导致价格上升。价格上升应该赶紧出售吧，但是他希望，他不仅仅是想得到更多的利润，他希望得到以后更多的利润，把中国商人和西方商人的这个价格关系给搬过来，所以他就一味的在这儿拖啊，但拖到一定程度，拖不下去了。
Victory in this commercial war was only a small step away from Hu, but then a great misfortune suddenly occurred.
中法战争爆发，西方发生了经济危机， 对中国的影响很大，人们对前途不乐观，在不乐观的情况下，有一些商人顶不住了，就往外闷死，这一闷死，他整个的同盟就给破坏了啊，最后就亏损非常大。
外国资本本来资金就很雄厚、很强大，再加联合在一起，而胡雪岩这边是孤军奋战，而且在他那个困难的时期，别的中国华商还要把他的富康那个票号里面的存款纷纷要提出来，因为那个华商他也担心从个人考虑自己的，不愿意自己受损失，啊，一看那个形势不对了，纷纷提，一下子导致这个富康票号也破产。
Then the foreign banks in Shanghai all announced they were halting the issuing of loans. Shanghai experienced a money squeeze, and trade came to a standstill. Fukong Bank depositors scrambled to withdraw their money. Having no other choice, Hu declared bankruptcy.
他的钱庄倒闭了，他的好多的企业啊，债权人很多吧，我放在你的票号里边，那么你还不上了，你的事业都要来顶吧。他的胡庆余堂很有名的，那他好像就是一个很大的医药机构啊。你到这个时间，你得跟别人讨价还价，你必须要钱，你讨价还价也上不去了。啊，另外他修了一个很大的很大的叫什么呢？类似乔家大院那样的，叫庄园吧。这个庄园最后也卖出去了啊。最后他是在外面租了间房子，在里边冻饿而死。
The bankruptcy of the Fukong Bank was a major setback to the modern Chinese financial industry. And the financial crisis it caused also had a strong impact on the Shanxi banks. The news that southern China's most eminent businessmen had gone bankrupt spread rapidly. It triggered a nationwide public panic. People rushed to local banks to withdraw money. The bank run swept across the entire country. In Shanghai, there were 78 large bank offices in the beginning of that year. After the run on the banks, only 10 of them survived. And 300 to 400 warehouses and shops in the city also had to close down.
因为当时形成一个特点，就是钱庄的钱不是来自外资银行，就是来自票号。所以一旦发生经济危机，表现形式的大量的票号、大量的钱庄破产，钱庄破产，潜在就要引来票号的破产。
In February 1884, the Tianji Sheng Bank, which had been opened by Shanxi businessmen over 20 years earlier, was left exposed with insufficient silver reserves after its Suzhou branch failed to transfer money. It caused a run on the bank and resulted in a defrayal crisis at other branches. In the end, it went bankrupt, and its owner was arrested over the outstanding accounts. Several years later, another bank opened by a Shanxi businessman named Sun was also affected by redemption problems. The bankruptcy of the Hunan Tea Company resulted in its failure to return money to the Hankou branch. In 1890, it was closed down. The crisis spread to other branches and finally led to a full collapse. With a succession of financial crises striking, Chinese private banks, foreign banks gradually took control of the Chinese money market.
外资银行在中国的金融市场上参与金融活动以后，他们发现，如果银两的供求之间的关系，当供给大于需求30两多的时候，利率就会下降到8%左右。如果说外资银行能够收回钞票，造成自己的紧张，利率还会上升到33%。发现这样一个秘密以后呢，他们就在金融市场上上下其手，从中呢来制造混乱。
During financial strains, foreign banks that dominated Shanghai's financial market did not continue to invest in the market during times of monetary contraction. On the contrary, they largely reduced the number of loans. By creating a financial crisis, the foreign banks started to gain control of the trading ports and even control over China's entire financial destiny. The private banks that had enjoyed peace for so long were forced to go through the repeated crucial test of various financial crises. But in those hard times, private banks did not simply await their doom. A number of people with foresight and vision started to compete against foreign financial powers in their own way. In 1905, representatives of Peking Syndicate Limited came to what was then the Shanxi Bureau of Commerce. They showed a note on which Shanxi officials were asked to comply with the mining agreement they had signed with the British company. They required the mining rights of coal and iron ore in the 5 counties of Shanxi and threatened the government with closing down local coal mines. This set off a campaign of mining protection. Almost all the Shanxi banks participated in this campaign. The leader was a descendant of Chu Benqiao, a local banker. A large architectural complex was located at number 33 East Street in Qixian County, Shanxi. Over 100 years before, the luxurious compound had belonged to a celebrated business family. At that time, it was called the Chu's compound. The Chu family was an eminent family in Shanxi. Back in the mid-18th century, the family grew and thrived through the tea trade. In 1860, the Chu family set up a bank, naming it Bai Chuan Tong. In 1862, the Chu family started another bank, the Sanjin Yuan, which propelled them into the ranks of other tycoons. The founder of Sanjin Yuan was Chu Benqiao's father, Chu Yuanzhen. During the self-strengthening movement, Chu's bank had made some industrial investments. In 1875, Sanjin Yuan's Nanchang branch transferred 50,000 taels of silver from Jiangxi to the governor of Tianjin. But the Chu family had no idea that the money was to be used to establish the first Chinese Navy. That same year, Rishengchang, a minister, presented a submission to the emperor proposing to purchase ironclad warships and establish a navy in order to strengthen coastal defense. Chu's Baichuan Tong branch in Sichuan also transferred 300,000 taels of silver to the Navy office. Chu Benqiao was the 18th generation of descendants of the Chu family. He was gifted and intelligent and was lauded as a child prodigy from his childhood. In 1892, Chu was a successful candidate in the highest imperial civil service examination and started his official career. He was the first successful candidate in all the Shanxi merchant families in 100 years. In 1903, the government appointed Chu as China's consul in Yokohama, Japan. At that time, Japan's modern industry was developing rapidly through the Meiji Restoration. Chu saw the hope of making the country rich and the people prosperous. After he came back from Japan, Chu resigned from his post and began managing the family's banking business. He also began to invest in new industries. In Taiyuan, there's a place called Three Bridge Street. Today, it is a very ordinary street. But back then, this is where the famous Taiyuan match factory was located. On this old map of Taiyuan, the match factory is clearly marked at the center. The Taiyuan match factory was established in 1892. It was the first modern industrial enterprise in Shanxi. However, since the public were not accustomed to using matches, after 3 years, the enterprise had suffered a loss of 120,000 taels of silver. In 1903, Chu bought the failing factory for 5,000 taels of silver and changed the name to the Double Happiness Match Company. It was the first time non-governmental capital had been used to initiate modern industry. Under Chu's management, the company soon turned losses into gains. By the early 1900s, the company's assets had reached 200,000 taels of silver. In 1905, the governor of Shanxi, Hu Pingzhi, signed an agreement with Peking Syndicate Limited, selling the mining rights to Shanxi coal and iron ore to the British company.
这个消息后来被民间知道了，传出去了，人们就批评胡品子卖国。后来胡品子也因为此受到清政府的斥责，最后官都给丢了，被免官啊。那么应该这么来讲吧，这个合同定的是有什么问题啊？你不能说，你可能说把一个地方的资源交给他，你不能把全省的资源交给他，你总得给民间留一点嘛。另外吧，民间现在干不了，不等于以后干不了啊。
Shanxi was a province rich in coal and resources. They were mainly explored by small coal mine operations. Once the British company monopolized the mining rights, it would threaten the survival of these local coal miners. Hearing that the British were going to monopolize the mining of Shanxi coal resources, Chu and some other patriots decided to establish the Shanxi Defensive Mining Company, SDMC. They wanted to seize the mining rights from the British. Through tough negotiations, Chu reached an agreement with the British businessmen on behalf of the local government. They would pay 2.75 million taels of silver to redeem the mining rights. This large amount of money would be paid in 4 installments. The down payment would be half of the total.
因为复工是规定的条件比较苛刻，就是在签订协议以后，要在1个月以后先交一半那个赔款，这是咱也拿不出钱来。
Chu had just been elected as the first general manager of SDMC. He felt a pressure that he had never experienced before. With limited time, he had to raise 1.37 million taels of silver. Because the government needed to pay the war compensation, the national treasury was almost empty. Even the provincial governor could not lay his hands on so much money. Having no choice, Chu convened a meeting of the managers of the major banks of Shanxi. He called on them to gather 1 million taels of silver so that they could reclaim coal mining rights from the British. The banks had just completed their distribution of dividends. There would not be much money left in their accounts. This unexpected large amount of money troubled all the banks. During their meeting, Chu passionately stated the rights and wrongs of the situation. He asked them to inform their branches in Beijing to, first of all, immediately transfer the money to avoid breaking their promise and protect the reputation of Shanxi merchants. The British companies did not want Chinese people to redeem the rights to coal mining, so they colluded with the foreign banks in Beijing and asked them to call in loans. This is how they tried to trap the Chinese banks. With a strong sense of patriotism, the owners and managers of the banks had soon gathered over 1 million taels of silver. Later, one participant recalled, the Chinese banks stayed calm without the help of foreign banks. They relied on their own strength and gathered the money as required. The foreign businessmen were very surprised. The power of Shanxi's banks could be seen to be remarkable.
当时呢，英国人没有想到山西能够筹这么多钱，短期内筹这么多钱把这个办成，所以也就同意，很快就筹起来了。这主要依靠了票号，可以看出啊，票号商人呢爱国心是非常强烈的。
Apart from helping the SDMC reclaim the right to mine coal, Shanxi banks subscribed a third of 600,000 commercial shares offered in the company. They had become the most important supporters of the company. Writing about the success that SDMC had obtained after several years' efforts, the Ta Kung Pao newspaper published an article saying that the Shanxi merchants were so united that their future development must be beyond imagination. However, SDMC had suffered a capital shortage since the very first day of its establishment. It could not continue to maintain production Chu Bengqiao was forced to resign from his position as general manager.
屈本桥党人发动的保矿运动和英国富公司达成协议，拿谢银200多万两来赎回矿权，但是没有钱，向票号商人借款。借款呢，是省政府提供一种承诺，由地税收入来偿还这一笔款项。但是后来政府违约，使得富公司和屈邦桥本人的信誉都受到了一定的影响。
However, SDMC did not let the public down. The company grew into today's Yangchuan Mining Bureau, the first modern coal mining enterprise in Shanxi. It was also once the largest of its kind in China. The success of the campaign also made many Shanxi merchants turn their attention to emerging industries rather than traditional ones. The construction of the famous Tongpu railway line began in 1933. It is a trunk railway stretching 800 kilometers, connecting the north and south of Shanxi. It was also a major coal transportation route from Shanxi to other places. Nearly all the places along the railway became important commercial cities and towns in the 20th century. Its construction was closely linked to the private banks in Shanxi. In 1905, Liu Dujing, head of the Shanxi Bureau of Commerce, laid the plans for building the Tongpu line. It was estimated that the project would cost over 30 million taels of silver. Liu decided to carry the project forward through a public offering. The first preference shares were 3 million taels of silver. Because many of the stockholders in the Bureau ran banks, following the public offering, they subscribed for shares worth 600,000 taels of silver. Other banks in Shanxi subscribed for 400,000 taels. Plus extra loans, the capital amounted to more than 1.5 million taels of silver. In 1933, as the nation fell into turmoil once more, work started on the Tongpu railway line. The initial support from banks had played a decisive role in propelling the project forward.
《票号对工商业的放款数量也比较多。如果没有票号的支持，城市工商业的发展呢是比较困难的。看来呢，在这个时期，中国的金融资本已经和商业资本相互结合，对于中国经济发展，这也是一个很重要的一个阶段。
As more and more bankers set foot in the world of industry, traditional merchants gradually transformed to new-style merchants. It was a time when Shanxi was gradually becoming the place with the largest number of modern enterprises in northern China. Development enriched by industry had provided the banks with more sources of capital. The bankers had found new opportunities. With the increase in the export of raw materials and the import of foreign products, foreign trade developed rapidly in China. Between 1862 and 1893, the average total value of traded products was 150 million taels of silver per year. In 1910, the figure hit a record high of 840 million taels. Now the bankers realized that the overseas market might be a new channel for even greater profits. On April 30th, 1907, a newspaper in Kobe, Japan, published an advertisement for the opening of a new bank office. It was the Kobe branch of the Rishengchang Yuan Bank. The Rishengchang Yuan Bank had been founded in 1837. After several decades, it became a bank with an asset value reaching 10 million taels of silver by the 1880s. In 1891, a young man called Shanxi, who was just 15 years of age, was recommended for an apprenticeship at Rishengchang Yuan in Qi County. He studied hard and memorized all the business flows in just 4 years. The owner and manager liked him a lot. Early in the 20th century, the proportion of Japanese product value in China's import and export trade rose. Japan became the most important trading country. In 1906, Shen, who had been promoted to branch manager, hurried to Kobe with a great sum of money. He applied to the Japanese government to open a bank. After many setbacks, Shen finally established China's first overseas bank. By the winter of 1907, Rishengchang Yuan established Japanese branches in Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka, as well as in Incheon, Korea. These branches made substantial gains from the international transfer and loans business. In 1907 and 1908, the total sum for transfer and remittance reached over 20 million taels of silver per annum, creating a record among Chinese private banks. The success of Rishengchang Yuan encouraged many other bankers. In the period which followed, establishing overseas branches became a popular move for them. Chinese bankers actively expanded their overseas market and opened branches as far off as Urga, Mongolia, and Kyakhta and St. Petersburg in Russia.
华人得到哪里，他需要跟国内建立经济联系吧。华人得到哪里，票号就得到哪里。
There was a saying at that time, where there were sparrows, there were Shanxi merchants, and where there were Shanxi merchants, there were Shanxi banks. Banking was closely linked to Shanxi merchants, both at home and abroad. As we look back today at these commercial wars of the 19th and 20th century, the impressive strategy and courage demonstrated by the private bankers is clear. Confronted by dark and dangerous political situations, they made successful breakthroughs during these commercial wars. The world was changing rapidly, and industrialization was redrawing the map of the world economy. Many influential international banks were growing and developing. In China, a great revolution was also brewing. As new banking systems took hold, Chinese private banks were still involved in internal squabbles. Inevitably, the old establishments would be replaced by more advanced financial organizations. Join us for the next part, Transformation.